It sucked me in, and I just kept turning pages and turning pages, and I felt like, did I miss something? I'm in the middle of this and it started out wonderfully. It was great, and you got to know the characters immediately.
Thank you.
And this is a series that I hope really works for you and takes off, because it's got legs, I think.
Thank you.
So, were you asked to create, because it's very popular now, chick lit, adventure stories. Did an editor come to you and say, hey, how about something along these lines? Throw in some vampires?
No. It was funny because when Buffy was on, I thought, this is the coolest thing I'll ever get to do as a writer, ever. I mean, I would cry. We'd get the new scripts. They would FedEx the scripts to us. I'd wake up in the morning like, oh. I would go out on the porch and there'd be my new script. And I just burst into tears. I was so excited and so happy. And so then when Buffy was ending, and Angel and all that was happening, I thought, this is it. This is the coolest thing that will ever happen to me as a writer. And I mourned when the last broadcast, the night that the last episode was on, I didn't watch it. I did a Barbie puzzle with my daughter.
Really?
And I kept looking at the clock, and I was just about to weep. I thought, oh, this is awful. But I had started sending out notices to other publishers and saying, I've been writing for Buffy for 10 years, and now Buffy's ending, and I'm looking for new work. And so I started writing for Harlequin. They had a line called Silhouette Bombshell, and they were Buffy-like characters that you would mention Buffy. It's like, Angela Jolie, Laura Croft, Tomb Raider kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, good, I'm still having cool time. And then my agent kept saying, I think there's going to be a market for books with, like, women who are like Buffy. So you should write something. I'm like, yeah, I will. And I didn't. And then the whole urban fantasy thing hit. And he kept saying, see? I'm like, yeah, I blew it. I missed that. And then Debbie and I started writing together, and we wrote way back during the Buffy years. We wrote the first 4 books of Wicked. They came out in 2000. And they didn't really take off or do anything. And we wanted to finish the story. We had written 4, and we left it on a cliffhanger. So for 6 years, nobody knew what the answers were. We're going to just put them on a website and say, these are the answers to what happens in Wicked. So Wicked hit the New York Times bestseller list when it was reissued. We wrote the 5th book, and then we wanted to keep writing together. And we had mentioned at the very end of Wicked that there were vampires in the world called cursed ones. And we thought, we could write about that! And of course, being a huge vampire fan, I mean, Debbie is too, but I, of course, am kind of rabid. So I've written lots and lots of vampire short stories and outside of Buffy, and one of my very first attempts to sell something was a book about the 3 brides of Dracula, which Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough went ahead and did later, and I think she's a fabulous, wonderful vampire writer. So so it wasn't like, can you write about vampires? It's, could we write about vampires? And a lot of people still say, oh, vampires, there's too much vampire stuff out, and Twilight's the one, you can't go past that. But we've found lots of people who are still interested in vampires like we are. So,
and vampires, they're just exploding in popularity. And what do you think comes next? I mean, zombies are sort of geek chic, but I don't see them taking over that romantic part of vampires. I mean, are vampires always going to remain on top, or do you see something else coming along?
Debbie and I have also sold a new series. It's called the Wolf Springs Chronicles, and it's werewolves. And I think werewolves are going to be the next thing. Especially Taylor Lautner is not a bad-looking guy. So I think that I hope that werewolves are the next big thing. But I'll always write about vampires. I mean, it's kind of Source Nancy. Although the whole conceit of Wolf Springs is very cool because we're in a way, not precisely, but riffing off King Lear. So it's King Lear with vampires. Yeah. I mean, with werewolves, I'm sorry.
Well, it's not a bad source to go to. I mean, Shakespeare has some sturdiness to him.
Definitely.
What do you like to read yourself? Or do you even have time to read these days?
Actually, one thing I wanted to say, you had asked me about how I got my Buffy gig. And I remember that the other piece that I had was that I had written a Highlander tie-in novel. It was my very first tie-in novel, and it was about Machiavelli. Machiavelli was an immortal. So that's the kind of thing I like to read. I like to read fantasy, and I like to read about, well, I love Duncan MacLeod. I mean, I'm sorry, he's the man. But I'm also an MFA professor for Stone Coast creative writing program, and it's an MFA through the University of Southern Maine, which is actually part of the University of Maine system, and we are a low residency program, and I go twice a year to Maine. And I spend about a month a year in Maine. It's so beautiful, and I love to read my students' work. A lot of my students have published or will be publishing. A lot of people need an MFA to teach because it's a terminal degree. A PhD is a terminal degree, and MFA in creative writing is the highest degree you can get in. They don't have a PhD FA. So if you're going to be teaching in universities, you need an MFA. So famous writers have gone through our program to get their MFAs. And I get to read their student manuscripts. So I have 6 students, and I read their manuscripts, and I was just reading one on the plane. And it's about these weird kind of cat people. It's awesome. So I usually get the science fiction, fantasy, and horror students. Sometimes they get mystery people or different, popular fiction genres. But I get mostly the science fiction, fantasy, and horror people, and they're awesome. So I read their stuff. And Stephen King said, if you don't have time to read, you're like a bozo. So I'm trying very hard to stay current, and my new editor at Delacorte sent Debbie and me about 20 or 30 books to say this is what I've edited or I like. And I'm reading a book right now called Andromeda Klein, and it's really, really good. It's really bizarre, so I highly recommend it. Portman, I think, is the author.
Portman.
Very weird.
Well, look for that.
Yeah, it's good.
So, obviously, you've been involved with the Buffy show. Have you met Joss? Have you?
Oh, yes. I got to talk to him a few times. I was on set. I was probably on set for Buffy and Angel an aggregate of about a month. And I got to the point the first time I was there all the time because I didn't want to miss a thing. And I'd get there in the morning and I'd leave at midnight. And they were all there. That's what amazes me. In their workday schedule mindset, it's 12 hours minimum. And